Good evening and welcome to the North Ogden City Planning Commission meeting for April 21st, 2021. My name is Brandon Mason. I'm going to conduct the meeting. I'm the vice chairman. I'm going to conduct the meeting until Eric arrives. He didn't, Eric Thomas, and he'll take over at that point. He didn't realize that we had an in-person meeting tonight, so he's en route. I know that Commissioners Nancaro, Commissioner Arner, and Commissioner Barker are on our Zoom meeting. I'm present, Commissioner Vice Chairman Mason, Commissioner Lunt is present, Commissioner Thomas is en route, and does that leave us with anyone missing? Commissioner Webb is so far AWOL. So that'll be noted unless they otherwise show up. Are the doors open outside?
They are.
Okay. Let's see. I'm a little out of my element here, but we're going to start as always with an invocation or thought by Commissioner Lunt, followed by a recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Nancaro.
Our Father in heaven, we're very grateful for the opportunity that we have to be able to meet together tonight for the Planning Commission meeting in North Ogden City. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to be together, whether through technology or in person. As we move through our agenda tonight, that we'll be able to have quality discussion on the items, and that we may know how to best plan for the future of our city, and the people who live here in a way that will benefit all involved. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Prior to the Pledge of Allegiance, let me add that we have been just doing a recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance while we were on Zoom. I do invite the members that are present to stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Those are on Zoom may do so or may remain silent at their choice. Thanks. Commissioner Nancaro.
Please join me. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Nancaro, Commissioner Lunt. Okay, we've taken our roll already. I did that a little out of order. Please note the roll. Come to the point of the meeting where we will entertain the minutes approval from last meeting. Anyone have a chance to review those?
I wasn't here, so.
Okay, I have reviewed those. Do we have anyone else who would like to comment on those? Being possibly the only one to have reviewed the minutes, I move that we approve them. They look valid to me.
A second?
And we do have a motion to second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And do we have an aye from, I can't see, do we have an aye from both on Zoom? I heard one.
Yes.
Okay, any opposed? Given that nobody opposed, we'll go ahead and approve those minutes. Thank you. Okay, ex parte communications or conflict of interest to disclose. Be there any?
No.
Nope.
I myself have none. Thank you. Okay, we are always interested in hearing from the public. At this time, we're opening up to items that may not be on the agenda.
You missed the opening meeting statement.
I missed the opening meeting statement. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and read the opening meeting statement. Do we have that? We find the opening meeting statement. Otherwise, I'll have to summarize it.
I don't believe it's included in the packet.
It should be one of the first pages of the packet.
Okay.
If not, I can go ahead and summarize the intent of the opening meeting statement, and I'll go ahead and do that while Commissioner Thomas gets settled. So the Planning Commission is interested in hearing from anyone that wants to address us. We do have a procedure that we ask you to adhere to, and that is that you, if possible, hold your comments until the appropriate times during the meeting. So please don't speak out during the meeting. We ask for public comments that for items not on the agenda at the first of the meeting, and then if you do have an agenda item to speak to that's, or do you have a comment to something on the agenda, please hold it for that time, and we'll try to give you time to talk then. Please hold your comments to 3 minutes unless you're the applicant. We give you 5 minutes. If you do need additional time, ask for that, and that may be granted. Please address the planning commission and not any other member of the audience or staff. We can't guarantee we're going to answer all questions, but we are interested in hearing your comments, and those are always taken into consideration. Did I miss anything else in the opening meeting, Steve? Thanks. So, Mr. Thomas, are you prepared to take back over the meeting? I think we've got through. We're up to
Parte Communications.
we're on item number 5. I'm going to turn the gavel back over to Commissioner Thomas.
All right, thanks. Apologies that I'm late. Fortunate, we're a small enough town. It doesn't take very long to get here. We'll go ahead to item number 4, ex parte communications or conflicts of interest. Anything that needs to be brought before the body today on any items?
We did that and we were in negative, so you'd be the only one
Oh,
that
we did do that.
had a chance to discuss this.
Okay. Public comments. Anybody would like to address the planning commission for items not on the agenda, please do so at this time. If not, we'll give an opportunity to each agenda item.
There are no public comments on
No
Zoom.
raising hand. All right, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Item number 6, discussion on the capital improvement plan for streets Monroe alignment. Presenter is Dave Espinoza, our Public Works Director.
Maybe I could give an introduction if you don't mind.
Okay, Dave's eyes are
No,
going big back
No,
there.
we've talked about, a couple weeks ago, we went on a field trip with respect to streetscape. And remember that the planning commissioners asked questions about the future construction and alignment of Monroe Boulevard. And as such, we indicated that we would ask Dave to come and just share a little bit about the process that the city goes through in their budgeting. It's mainly their budgeting process. You're familiar with our general plan, our financial plan, but as it relates to capital projects, it's called just that, capital improvements plan. So believe me, Public Works that do not have 80 or 90% of all of that because of all of their activities that they're involved with. And so that's, we extended that invitation to Dave and he's here.
Yeah, we're going to help me out a little bit with this as well, but I guess the biggest thing is in talking.
You may need to speak into a microphone for our Zoom
You want to sit
attendees.
here?
Sorry, you can say that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, the biggest thing is with the CIP is in these situations is trying to determine, a lot of times we're working with the developer, right? Do you have that map, Katie, from Lauren?
I do.
Dave, were you going to address that? One of our concerns with, the design of the road and stuff is that if we create an area of grass or something for the city to maintain, is the city interested in maintaining that?
And I guess that's the biggest question, and it always comes back to, obviously that's a money and a maintenance issue at that point, right? Does the city want to maintain that, like you just asked? But from our standpoint as well, I mean, is putting that middle section in there at 20 feet in all asphalt, this is what the cost would be. Is there something better that we could be using, with that cost? And so, I really want to work with, this group and, the planning commission and the council on trying to figure out what that answer is, I guess. For instance, we're doing the one here off of 2750. And right now that extra 20 feet that the city's paying for is asphalt, right? We're just gonna put it back in asphalt. That doesn't mean that the rest of these other pieces that we're talking about, where we have to build the rest of this Monroe. That's the biggest question, is because every time we hear, are we gonna do a planted median? Are we gonna do a riprap where we can collect storm drain water? Are we just gonna do asphalt? Yeah, that's the biggest question is, we're always trying to do it in conjunction with what the developers needs are asking from us as far as when they're putting their development through there, because we're gonna go with what the developer is coming in with, right? You know, we talked about it with Rob, and he said, you know, do you have this money set aside or doing these things to plan for this section of road coming in? We just don't know when that road's gonna come in, you know, because a lot of it is driven by development, right? And especially Monroe is driven by development. And so, yeah, that's a good question. I guess I don't have that answer for you. As far as what, do we want to maintain it? I don't think we have a problem maintaining it at all. If you guys, if that's what the planning commission comes back and says, you know, we're recommending you do a planned median, or we're recommending that you guys come back and do a, you know, rip wrap in there so that your stormwater can go in there. As part of some of that discussion. So, yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that I don't feel like there's like a hard line in the sand from the city or from Public Works saying no, absolutely no, you know, planning median or no, those kind of things that we want asphalt. Like, I don't feel like there's that line in the sand. So I guess to answer your question, I think we'll just take it per development that comes in.
Do you see any, with capital improvement projects, obviously, that, as we deem them as projects, do you see that there ever being money set aside to build portions of this, or is all what you would anticipate as capital improvement money for projects going to really be going to rebuilding infrastructure that's already existing?
That is my, you know, my goal is to always put it back into rebuilding, right? But you know, if we can find that one area is just not going to be done without, you know, and we're getting down to where these small slivers are, and we think that that's something that needs to do so that we can connect Monroe Boulevard, then I don't think that's out of the question at all. Do I think most of it will be driven by development? Yes, but you know, I think that there's an understanding that we're probably going to have to do some small pieces to make sure that we get that connectivity.
I don't anticipate development driving some of the designs that we're talking about, because they're going to be big and expensive, right? I think we need to have a plan of how for Mountain Road and for Monroe, and then the developers will conform to that. But I mean, I think I wouldn't anticipate a developer to come in and say, hey, I'm going to put this big 80-foot wide road in and put a planted median in it. I just don't think that'll happen. I think we need to have that laid down in advance, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say if that's something that we're going to do, that island or whatever is a city expense and or a trade-off that the developer can receive an expense equivalent value in trade with something. You know, I mean, we talk about development rights and different things like that. I mean, in the sense that we can look at options and say, you know, hey, look, you're granted, the zone grants this if we offered a bonus density of saying, hey, you can have 3 more units if you would put this plan B in, you know. So there can be ways to create that, to do it. I know in some cities that I've done stuff in, they call bonus density, where if you're improving something on the city's general master plan that is a city expense, if they deem that it's a sufficient trade, then give some bonus density so that development can pay for that. So it doesn't have to come out of the city's pockets. And
I guess my question to you guys is, I mean, do you guys have a idea of what you want? Do you want that line of median? Do you want
Well, I mean,
you know, a swell that can?
I think some of us want it all, right? Like we want a trail and a planted median and like a subway underneath it, and like really, but you know, we wanted to. I think the purpose of this discussion is we want to work in the confines of what we have. Like Eric is a big proponent of, we have 80 feet, you can only use 80 feet. And, you know, I mean, maybe if there was a way to get 90 feet I mean, I don't know. I think, in my opinion, the planning commission really liked what they saw on Skyline Drive, I think, for Mountain Road, which is what was it?
The
10
section we
foot?
stopped at. The other
Yeah.
sections we drove on,
Yeah,
not so much.
Yeah. which was, I guess, I mean, can you guys help me out? Was it 12 foot or a 10 foot grassy median with some trees throughout it?
Yeah, probably something like that.
And you have one lane in each direction other than that. And then I know, the parks wants a 6 foot trail, I think.
Was it 6?
So most of the time, her standard trails are 6 feet.
Staff had a meeting today talking about these various options.
You may need a microphone.
Staff,
Hold him to it.
that's all right. Staff
I have a question.
Staff
Yes.
today, and we're gonna be providing you with options, so this will be the specific cross-section for Mountain Road is going to be an agenda item that's upcoming for you all. So, didn't mean to put Dave on the spot.
Ernie, do you envision Monroe doing the same thing, or do you have other expectations for
I
Monroe?
think we kind of all felt, Commissioner, speak up on your opinion, but I kind of think we felt like the planted median or something like that was more conducive to Mountain Road, where Monroe, we feel like it's more. We feel like for whatever reason, Monroe is going to get people off the hill. Mountain Road is kind of that wide neighborhood road that's going from east to west in the city. But we did like a while back at the intersections of Monroe, maybe having bulb outs that come out as far as the parking lanes on the side.
Yeah.
At the intersections, just as a traffic calming, so it doesn't seem like it's a straight
Just as
thoroughfare like
thoroughfare.
Washington.
I understand.
And we talked about a tree line Mountain Road at one point too, having X amount of trees on Monroe, yeah, which would differ from Skyline.
Commissioner Barker, you got a comment? I did hear you say something.
Well, we're going to have to go backwards now, but that's okay. I got confused. When you gave the discussion of pavement versus planted medium about trade-offs, does a planted medium cost quite a bit more than a pavement, or are they equal in price?
It's probably more money.
For the planted medium?
I mean, that we'd have to determine that at the time, but with the planted median, at least the ones we saw had curb and gutter
Correct.
as well, so that's what. Run that up, Rob.
As we talked today, Commissioner, that's a great question. We got the assignment from our city manager to actually come up with comparative costs. So when that comes back, you'll have that.
But
Okay.
something you know, Commissioner Barker, is on those 80-foot right of ways, it's the city policy that the city does pay for the additional asphalt to make those roads wider. So in a sense, if it is a similar expense, it may not be any more additional asphalt to the developer if you do that median. And so those dollars that the city would normally spend on asphalt could go towards that median.
Well, that talks about the initial put in of it, but what about the long-term upkeep of it?
Yeah, there's definitely a maintenance cost that I think we need to really.
That's gonna be on your monthly bill, planted median assessment. Just kidding. Uproar here. Yeah. 25 cents a month for everybody.
I think those are great considerations though, and unknown. I guess that's gonna be part of the finding.
Another thing to think about is, I mean, I kind of mentioned it a little bit, is using those areas as swells as well, right? To capture some of that storm drain water. For instance, the one that we're doing up here on that Monroe piece, we're gonna have the city's detention basin directly across the street from the subdivisions detention basin. So I mean, we're gonna have 2 detention basins sitting there. And it's like, maybe if we can start using utilizing some of these areas like that median as a swell, maybe we can go away from some of the detention basins and those kind of things. That's always another thing to look at as well.
Okay. Did you have anything else for us on this?
No, sir, unless you guys have any other questions.
Do we have any other questions for the Public Works Director?
They're all saying no.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time.
Any other discussion on this item before we move on? I think it sounds like we wait and see what is presented to us for cross section for the mountain road itself.
I know that you're all enthralled with the city budget process, but each year the capital improvements plan is updated on an annual basis, correct? Dave?
Yes.
So,
Okay, let's go on to item number 7, consideration and action regarding annexation of the property located approximately 304 East, 2000 North, and to receive a recommended zone of C2. Rob?
Chair, members of the commission and audience, we've received an application for another annexation to the city. If we can pull up the zoning map, I think we can maybe just go to we'll get to the zoning map in a second. Let's just go down to where the map showing the property is located. Right there, can you blow that up? So along 2000 North, as you come west off of Washington Boulevard, there's Bullfrog's Spas on the northwest corner. Next to that, there's a photography place, and next to that, there is a single-family home, fairly large parcel. It's about an acre, if I remember right. And then there's another single-family home. The properties in this area are somewhat mixed, and it's actually in compliance with our general plan that talks about mixed use in this part of our city. So we've got commercial that is on the north side. On the south side, we have some commercial, and we also have some manufacturing with the storage units that are located there. And then we have some single family development as well that's scattered in and around this particular neighborhood. As part of this discussion, usually these annexations are very simple, but in this case, we're getting a request that is one that you're going to need to be making a policy determination on. It's almost, and I actually did an analysis like we were doing a rezone for this one for your benefit. Let's go through some of the particulars relative to this project. So it's 1.83 acres. And the applicant is the property owner is going to be selling it to Bullfrog Spas as a future expansion of their project. They haven't settled on a specific plan at this point, but more than likely it would be an expansion of their project. Mixed use might even be a part of it as well. So as I mentioned, let's take a look at the zoning map if we can now. Okay, if we can do that. Okay, then let's blow up that 2000 North area as well.
Sorry, I can't
Just
see
right
it.
there to
It's a
your
little
left.
piece of white.
It's blurry on my end, I'm sorry. That,
Down a little bit and then to the left.
No, just right. Yeah. Just right over the top.
Yeah.
Right there.
If you can just blow that up just a little bit more so we can read those designations. So this particular area is got a number of variety of zones. So you have commercial zoning, you have some R4 zoning, you have R18, you have manufactured zoning as well in that area. And then of course we've got a couple of county islands. And with respect to this property, the general plan designation shows this as single family or low density development, not necessarily single family, but low density development. So there's going to be a question here as to when you have this mixture of zones, what is going to be the most appropriate designation for zoning for this property. So as you're well aware of, I did make one typo in the memo. We are in the Southtown neighborhood and made that correction. Remember that we have the general plan guidelines for zone changes in our general plan. So I'd like to just review those quickly. So the first one talks about having a definite edge on projects and providing for integrative use. So as I indicated, the general plan map calls for this property to be developed as residential low density. However, properties to the east and south have a mixed use designation. Additionally, across 2000 North to the south are storage units with the MP1 zoning. This area is a blend of commercial, manufacturing, and residential uses. Again, this is a policy decision. The question before the Planning Commission and Council is where should the transition be established between the mix of uses within this neighborhood and commercial district? So,
Can I ask you a question regarding that?
of course,
So in the packet, there was an aerial shot of the area and a red square around it. And that red square was bigger, I believe, than the actual.
correct.
Okay, so I just want to make sure this doesn't bleed into, I couldn't imagine it doing that, into the backyards of those.
No,
Okay.
those properties are already in the city.
Okay, so this is tightly lined up with the road on the south end and
There's
the
a parcel.
backyards of the.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a parcel number that
Okay.
that I shared with you, and so it's strictly that
Okay,
property.
thanks.
You bet. Zoning should reflect the existing use of property to the greatest extent possible unless the area is in transition. Obviously, that's what's taking place. We're transitioning from a single family home on almost 2 acres to something new. Next, where possible, properties which face each other across a local street should be the same or similar zone. Collector and arterial roads may be sufficient buffers to warrant different zones. 2000 North is a collector street. Having a commercial use across from a manufacturing zone with storage units, in staff's opinion, would be appropriate. Next, zoning boundaries should not cut across individual lots or developments, and that would not be the case. It would be for the entire parcel. The next one is the Planning Commission may choose to use mixed use, multifamily, or professional office zoning as a buffer between commercial and residential uses. And this policy reflects the need to determine the relationship between the mix of uses. So again, it's a balancing test and a policy determination on your part. The next one says any non-residential zone abutting residential zone should be a mixed use or planned zone. Transitions between uses should be carefully thought through. Our comment there is the proposal is for this property should be weighed against the zoning standards for buffering. The potential exists to identify and address buffering provisions and incorporate them into a development agreement. So in terms of this possibility, when we assign a zone and what have you, a condition could be placed that as the site plan comes forward, that a development agreement could be developed as a part of this. Next, we go to the commercial guidelines. Generally, commercial zones should be located along Washington Boulevard and 2700 North. Access to commercial zones should avoid local streets within residential zones. Our comment here is that commercial and manufacturing zoning has also extended along 2000 North, which is a collector street. Adhere to the general plan recommendations for the downtown and Southtown. This property is within the Southtown neighborhood. As I indicated, there's a indication of desire for mixed use in this area. If compatible with the general plan, existing businesses on collectors and arterials should be allowed to expand while providing an adequate buffer with adjacent residential zones. Our comment here is similar to the one I just made. Zoning for commercial would allow for the eventual expansion of the Bullfrog Spa business, which is something that the city should want to incorporate. The next one talks about encouraging commercial uses to be developed with a focus towards walkable streets. And this policy could be incorporated into a development agreement, again, that would incorporate the overall designs. Consider development agreements to assure higher quality development. This is addressed in earlier comments, and it seems to maybe fit this circumstance. Promote mixed-use developments. The neighborhood already is a mixture of residential, commercial, and manufacturing uses. So when you look at this, I don't think there's any question that the property should be annexed into the city. It's a county island and it's in our declaration. The question before you is what zone should you recommend and under what circumstances? So we've given you a summary of land use authority considerations. Is the annexation and zoning proposal consistent with the general plan? Is the property located within the North Ogden City annexation declaration boundary? What is the appropriate zoning for this property and where should the transition be established? The mix of uses within this neighborhood and the commercial district. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission recommend that the city annex this property. The Planning Commission should also make a recommendation on the appropriate zone. If the C2 zone is recommended, we're recommending that a development agreement be incorporated to address buffering and walkable design. So that second part is an add-on from what's in the report. With that, I'll be happy to answer questions.
How did this end up on the consent agenda? I mean, it feels like we have some discussion and we're waiting for an action. And
That was just me not following through.
oh, sorry. Okay.
Got an old guy you're working with here.
Only you were right. Okay, so we're gonna treat this as a regular action.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I have a question,
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
quickly, just for clarity. This is Commissioner Nancaro. So in the aerial photo, it looks like there's actually two parcels within that county island. Are we just talking about the parcel on the east side?
That's correct.
And if so, the parcel on the west side, it looks like there's a home or some, I can't tell from the aerial photo. Is that parcel also owned by the applicant?
It is not. It's a separate ownership and it would still remain in the county and that's probably one zone.
Do you know what's on it? Is it a home?
It is.
Yes, it's a home.
It's a residence, okay.
And
I have a question, maybe a comment. When I was looking over, reading it over, I not quite sure understood. If we're to recommend a zone change to C2, would that also include a development agreement or just a development agreement without the zone?
Yeah, the recommendation is to incorporate both of them.
Okay, because I know looking at it, it looks like somebody shook it up in a can and dumped it out on the table and fell out. Because some of it looks transition, some of it doesn't.
Okay, let's, any other questions for Rob before we have the applicant up? Okay. Sean, do you
Yeah,
speak on?
I'll come to the microphone.
have a seat. That's nice.
Sean Maynard, owner of the Cannery Building. I'm here requesting that we annex this property in as a C2. My goal is to expand the cannery operations into that property. I had originally, I was under contract with the land to the north of the cannery and had hoped to expand there. But for reasons I'm not sure I understand, instead of it being developed as commercial, it was allowed to be townhomes, and that cut me out of that opportunity. So this is all that's left for the cannery to expand and thrive. I understand that it abuts residential and I'm prepared to address that buffering concern. But I think it's appropriate that commercial be across the street from the manufacturing zone as that buffer. And I think what I'll build there will be appropriate.
Can you address, so I actually, personally, I like seeing commercial expand, not just along Washington, but have some verticality to it, right? I think it makes interesting places for people to walk and things like that. But to that point, could you address the walkability? How you see that, or what's going on down there? Or,
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the definition of walkability in this instance.
And I don't know if
Define it for me.
anybody does, so don't feel bad.
I'll
So I've
put
driven that
bench,
road.
a statue.
Well, I've driven that road a number of times and and walked, I've gone parked with Mrs. Kavanaugh's and come over to your store and things like that, right? But, what do we have for sidewalk? And what do we have, how do you envision the transition from road to
Right.
sidewalk?
So right now, the sidewalk situation, I don't know how it happened, and maybe you can see on the aerial. It's right tight against the asphalt, and then there's a weird like jog in. I expect as it gets developed that I wind up giving up, 15 feet or so of park strip and sidewalk. Right now, it's not awesome. I expect whatever we wind up developing makes it better.
Yeah, so that most likely that the road width to the west will be maintained as far east as it can, and then transition back to the narrow portion that it is to get.
I mean, there are
We
some,
could pick the cannery building up and move it 20 feet.
Right. When I bought the cannery, I had angle parking on Washington, I had angle parking on 2000.
okay. I mean, this isn't a landscaping plan, but there are some principles of walkability that are a little more concrete, right? And those are generally things like, having a tree and things like that, right? So I don't think we're necessarily discussing a landscaping plan, but I mean,
I expect that there will be that discussion at some point. There'll be a sidewalk and some grass and some landscaping, et cetera. Buffering against the street and also buffering against the homes behind.
Yeah, so as any part comes in to the news, like a C2 zone, as this would be as a new development, it'd have to adhere to what our current development standards are, which some of the facilities around there don't, but that's just because they were there before the roads were. So there will be a different look and feel a little bit of the streetscape in front of this place, as it were commercial, compared to what you see a little bit further east. Just by ordinance, they would have to do that. And so then by, obviously, anything that comes in, then we go through the site plan and stuff like that. So what we see there as a road now, the applicant is correct, is he will end up giving up a portion of the ground to complete the right of way that's needed there, which would include park strip and sidewalk. And then as he develops, what that looks like as well to accommodate his development.
And I don't know how it'll play out eventually, but that remainder island, that one home that's on the remainder 1 acre, I suspect after we get through this process and have secured it and have the zoning, et cetera, that then I'll approach that last farmhouse and see if there's anything that can be done there.
okay.
What's the small parcel between this property and Canada?
The small parcel between is Crystal Leaf Photography.
Okay.
It used to be part of the cannery property. And a tenant of the cannery bought that from the previous owner of the cannery before I purchased it. And again, I'd be happy to own that as well and have the whole piece contiguous.
So when I'm talking zoning, I try not to take the specific application too much into consideration, right? Because it's a zone and it would apply to anyone, but tell me how you feel a commercial would impact being in the backyard of the neighboring residential, right? I mean, because obviously the manufacturing zone is probably not going to complain too much about a commercial
Right.
across the street, right? Who has the negative impact here?
The negative impact is to the neighbor to the rear. But I think it'd be substantially more inappropriate to impose a a single family home against 2,000 facing the manufacturing. It doesn't exist now, but
Very
that's
compelling argument.
right.
Very compelling argument. Okay, those are all the questions I have.
Is any other questions for the applicant?
They're all saying no.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
All right, thank you.
Discussion?
Do you have any
Or,
other comments?
oh. I guess would this be a public hearing at the city council?
Yes.
Okay. So if we would invite at this time if there's any public comments, this is not a public hearing, just we invite for public comments. Please raise your hand in the chat or stand up here in the room.
Do we have anybody trying to chat?
No, we don't.
All right. Commissioners, let's move on for, I guess this would be discussion and a recommendation to the city council.
I'm of the opinion that I'm going to go ahead and create a motion.
Okay.
And we can talk to that, positive or negative, but I'm going to go ahead and move that we recommend positive annexation to the city council of this property. And I recommend that the property come into the city under the C2 zoning designation as was applied for. I believe the rest of the technicality, so that's my motion. And I'm deliberately leaving out anything else on top of that. Because of,
Okay.
so I have a motion.
Discussion and then what?
Okay, it hasn't been
Do
seconded.
we have a second before we open up for discussion?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Discussion on the motion before us.
Does that motion need to include the development agreement, or is that separate for a later time?
I left it out intentionally. I mean, something, you guys can amend my motion or we can discuss that, but I felt like the confines of the approval of the actual building and all that will settle all that out. I didn't think it required an agreement. And I did think about that.
Yeah,
I-
I don't
Because
feel like it needs one.
Yeah. it's in the staff report, and I just wanted to make sure.
I think it's valid, and I think I would love to strike a development agreement, but I don't think it needs one. I think the natural, this is, again, I'm just discussing, and you know how I work, I throw ideas on the wall, and sometimes they're not great, but I think that I think the development of this will naturally kind of conform to what the area needs. I think we're going to get a wider street. I think it's a nice transition from a manufacturing zone to the residential zones. I like like I said, the east-west extension of commercial in the city. So we're not just thinking that commercials along Washington. I think that makes, you go get an ice cream and then you walk down Washington a bit, and then you walk up the street a little bit. I like that more for commercial. So I intentionally left that out of my motion.
I have
Oh,
no
I
problem.
agree with, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
I agree with you, Commissioner Mason, about, the transition of it all. The concern of the general plan doesn't, specifically calls for low density residential, but in this particular parcel, the applicant makes an excellent point as directly across from that manufacturing. I don't think it would be a very desirable place, for houses on there, for homeowners to want to build houses there, with what's surrounding it. So I think probably the most appropriate zoning would be the C2, and to have that expansion of this cannery business.
I just want to say I agree with both of you.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I do think that a development agreement, it can't hurt to include that in the motion. I mean, we can't go back and add it later, but to amend the motion or have a friendly amendment to add the requirement for a development agreement to be added to incorporate a walkable design or streetscape. I think, we can determine what the extent of that development agreement is later, but if we don't add it now, we can't go back and add it later.
Okay. Commissioner Mason, would you want to amend your motion to include your development agreement?
I don't disagree with Commissioner Nancarrow. I still of the opinion it doesn't need it. Let me ask the applicant how he'd feel about a development agreement with the city. So city would have, meaning the city council would have control over the design of your, and since I've addressed you, please answer that. How you feel about that? I mean, having been in your business a number of times, I feel like you want to build a quality product. And so I feel like that's going to happen with or without a development agreement. That's my take. But a development agreement would give a sure thing kind of for the city. So
I expect that that's exactly the case, right? I've been there for 20 years and I'm a fixture of North Ogden. I expect that what we'll produce will be, improvement of what's there and certainly better than what could happen. I'd rather work through it as the designs are developed and submitted. I'm not a fan of let's put a constraint on it now. I'd rather not have the development agreement, especially with the ambiguity of whatever it might be.
What, Commissioner Nancarrow, what are your concerns that you would like to be incorporated in a development agreement?
I think my concerns is, right now, we're talking to this particular applicant who has a vision and we love that vision. But say that development doesn't happen immediately. 10 years from now, he sells a property, has a different plan, whatever the case may be. At least when that property is developed, there would be an opportunity for, development agreement and some kind of input in what's there. Because, somebody can come in, build another big ugly warehouse or something. And, it's like, we have to look at the property and maybe not just the particular applicant, because we don't really know the future and how soon that's going to happen. And, if something happens, he sells the property in 5 years and nothing developed.
By way of development agreement, you would like to see maybe not the full breadth of the allowed uses that are in the C2 zone to maybe be limited down to some.
Right. I think the wording that Mr. Scott had mentioned was something along the lines of to incorporate a walkable design or a streetscape.
Okay, but that doesn't matter whether it was a warehouse or a firecracker store or ice cream.
That's true. That's true. So I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I guess I'm open to discussion, but I do think, I don't think Mr. Scott would have mentioned it in there as an issue if he didn't think there's a possibility it could be an issue.
Yeah, if it's transitioned, I mean, our zoning now, commercial as it abuts residential, has restrictions to create those buffers in the existing zoning ordinance. But maybe if it was a development agreement that was just simply addressing with a little bit more complexity, the walkability and the frontage on 2000, I would maybe be amenable to that, to just say we're going to incorporate a little bit more than the standard park strip and sidewalk. But I don't want to have the same thing. I would encourage commercial development. I see no reason why commercial development shouldn't be allowed to go to what would be the west border of the manufacturing zone along that street. I feel like that's probably a good line to draw. And so really going through the full breadth of a development agreement to identify every little thing, I don't think it's a piece of property that's so far removed from where we would have commercial that we would want the city to dig their fingers and teeth into the person's business to that depth. So
what would it buy us if we, instead of the heavy-handedness of a development agreement, what if my motion were to carry and only we amend it to make sure that the site plan review comes back before the planning commission and we have.
Well, it will, but what the development agreement does is it's saying they're agreeing to these terms prior to it coming in as a commercial zone. Because once it is a commercial zone, remember, then we're bound by whatever the law allows, not by what. So if the walkability is a concern, then maybe that's just simply a condition we put on the zone and ask the council to recommend that. Rob, you have a comment?
So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is making sure that whatever the design that is incorporated meets with the fact that we're going to be abutting residential. So in my mind, we should be thinking about what are the building materials, colors, buffering. We have some of those standards, but we don't have others. That zone doesn't have an awful lot that I think we can hang our hat on when it comes to this. And I have no, Sean and I have been working on, how many years have we been working on this? A couple of years anyway. He's been working on coming up with some revised plans and what have you. And it just seems to me that that gives some assurance to the abutting people that are in single family neighborhood, that they're going to have something, that they're not going to be faced with something that's going to be just out of character with their single family or residential homes. So it wasn't that I had so many concerns about this, that we're not talking about a 30-page agreement here. We're talking about maybe 1 or 2 pages, but just some basic design things that we can agree on. And obviously Sean would have to agree with it, as well as the city council. So that was the idea.
If I may.
Sean?
There exists a design standards for commercial property. I sat on the committee that created it 10 years ago. It would dictate that it have a certain aesthetic and appeal. And so I think that mechanism is already there.
Yeah, thanks. I would agree. I mean, in my opinion, it's not off. I mean, I shouldn't say it's not often, but we often have applicants that come in that do just fine. And, you're always going to have sometimes an applicant that will want to push the limits that maybe push from the opposite side to maybe not have the quality that we would want to have. But what development agreement just seems to be this hot topic in North Ogden. It seems, how many times are we approving something that's saying, well, if you do a development agreement, we'll approve it. And it gives us those abilities, but if that's always what we're doing, then let's fix our zoning, or let's fix our codes so we don't have to do those so much. And that's where, in this particular area, I feel like it's, that it's not needed. I mean, if it's simply a condition of, hey, we'd like a little bit bigger, wider sidewalk because that's on the street that the junior high is on. And it gets frequented walking traffic, maybe more than some other streets or things like that. I think some of those conditions could simply be met with some type of agreement with the applicant and the council, if that's so desired, that particular part of it. And I would say, we let our zoning requirements dictate what they should. And if it is a case that we feel like they don't, because we always want development agreements, then that's what we should be diving into to fix, instead of each applicant being subject to the current city council and what their desires are. Because that's who negotiates these development agreements, and they're a changing body. I mean, to use the project as an example that had a development agreement is, the Village of Prominence Point to the south. I think the development agreement was created 1 or 2 city councils ago, and as they continue to develop, now the new city council or the current city council will be subject to that agreement or amending it when they want something different. I mean, that's just the nature of cities and approvals. So, I mean, we're not getting away from it, but I would support it without a development agreement myself in the long scheme of it.
I choose to not amend my motion. I do encourage anyone who doesn't agree with my motion completely to vote against it, and the motion would die, and we can get another motion. But
Again,
yeah, no, that's the process, right?
yes,
So if you don't completely agree with it, go ahead and vote no. I, of course, won't be offended, and we'll come up with something that the council likes better. But I think I leave my motion unmolested. I've always wanted to drop that word in this meeting.
All right, any other discussion?
So do I need to withdraw the amendment suggestion or
No,
I think that was
because,
valid.
point of order?
no, you offered it, but Commissioner Mason, who made the motion, did not amend his motion. So
And that's why I was encouraging,
Okay,
that's why I was encouraging if we want that in there to vote no on my motion. Because
So
I kind of
appropriate-
snuck in, right?
The appropriate action would be, Commissioner Nancaro, if you wanted, you would make a substitute motion. See if there's a second, then you would vote on the substitute motion. If it passes, then it passes. If it fails, then you go to the original motion.
Okay.
So.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't feel that strongly about it. I just, thought it might be important, so, but I don't feel that strongly about it, so I say carry on.
Commissioner Carroll, I agreed with every one of your points, why you made that, to be honest with you, and I made them earlier, right? Like I try to look at the land and not the applicant as well, right? So I thought it was completely valid discussion.
Commissioner Barker, how do you vote?
Yes,
Commissioner Arner,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Nancaro,
Yes,
and is Commissioner Webb excused?
I got a text back from, he's tied up in a business
Okay.
meeting, so.
All right, and I vote yes. So that positive recommendation will go on to the city council. Most likely heard a month from now. They're required to receive our minutes before they put something on the agenda. So our
There's a
next meeting will
special,
be the minutes.
lengthy notice requirements for annexation.
Oh, that is true.
So
Be the
I
notice.
would encourage you to stay in touch with Katie in the recorder's office so that you can determine. when
The
that's
public
gonna be
hearing
on the
notice.
agenda. Sure,
I think, isn't it 14 days before a meeting?
there's annexation of just.
Oh, they're different. Public notice.
Well, the notice and it has to go to the state and
But typically, we always do that part of it concurrently with the approvals, right?
we're always much more efficient. It's the state law that's inefficient. It isn't
Yeah.
our other staff.
Well, what's
We
the,
make that
what's,
clear.
what's the term when it happens like that and we're the acting body for the county, right? There's whatever agreement we have with the county and they let it go concurrently. Anyway, moving on. Our legislative item number 8, Zone Text Amendment 2018-3. Consideration and recommendation on legislative amendment to create a sensitive lands chapter, amend the development constraints chapter, and amend the definitions chapter.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Rob?
Yes, you'll recall, commissioners, that back on March 17th, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing. At that time, a request was made that there be some additional time to submit additional information to the Planning Commission relative to this amendment. Since that time, staff met with representatives of Westside Development, and they had consultants that have provided some additional information. You got that in an email yesterday. I know it was very late, but you got it along with 2 other comments. I spoke to Carson Jones this afternoon, and the 2 other comments, a lot of their comments were based on misunderstanding as to what this ordinance was accomplishing. The map that they were referencing was one that talked about taking all of our hillside areas and turning it into conservation areas. So it was very much a miscommunication. And I think we have one of those individuals on that may want to speak tonight, but in any case, that I'm not discounting their comments by any means, but the original intent of their concerns as expressed by Carson today was that he totally misunderstood what was trying to be accomplished with the ordinance, and I spent a good deal of time helping to educate him. The second thing the group from Westside, in our discussion that we had, there was an awful lot of discussion that I think is ancillary to the sensitive lands ordinance. And there's a fair amount of misunderstanding with respect to city processes. And some of this land is, again, going to have to go through an annexation process, some of the one we just talked about. And that one is going to be a fairly extensive discussion. The commission has been up there on the North Cove site, and we've talked about various design principles that the city's interested in, and when that gets ripe for annexation. So an awful lot of the concerns that Drew were given attention to, I believe, I don't want to speak for people, but my impression was that the concern was, what is this going to do to our negotiations with respect to the overall designs and development of our properties that we're going to be bringing into the city? And that's a legitimate concern, obviously, and that's a separate process from what this ordinance is all about. As we have had 7 meetings, a public hearing, and now another deliberation this evening, the anticipation is that you would take into account their comments as well as some of the recommendations. I've got a couple things that I want to recommend, a couple changes to you tonight based on their comments. So it's always appreciated to receive comment, to get a further understanding of what it is that people's perceptions are relative to these standards. So along with that, let me just share with you a couple of things that I think we are, as a staff, are going to feel good about making some changes. But let me give you just again the summary. At the public hearing, there was a letter from Wasatch Civil. There were 3 points that they made. The first point was that they were concerned about the delimitation of properties under 20%. As you all know, that's our existing standard. It's been that standard for many, many years. And when you look at the amount of sloped area in the city, there's very little that's over 20%. Staff, we don't see any real reason that would be something that should be expanded. The second one was that there was a concern about the low impact design provision. There was a reference to an 80th percentile standard, and we agreed with that comment, and we have deleted it. And instead, we have substituted a statement that basically says we'll follow our public works standards. The third provision is one that talks about concerns about streets crossing slopes over 20% is limited to 200 feet. We wanted to have a standard that will allow for some recognition that there may be some unique circumstances, but again, there's so little property that's over 20%. And speaking with Lauren, we just feel like that's a reasonable standard. If something shows up that's different than that, then we'll work through that. But that's what our feeling is relative to that. So the next thing is that one of the things that we were not able to incorporate into our contract with the folks that are doing our land use code is that everyone that we've communicated with, staff as well as others, the city really needs a cluster ordinance. And a cluster ordinance is one in which there are unique pieces of property that aren't necessarily best suited for development, but we should be able to transfer some of the design and density from some of those areas into more easily developed properties, and in essence, kind of transfer the density within the project. So I've got a suggested language for you tonight, and I'm sorry, commissioners aren't here. We'll have to read it. It's just the top paragraph, number 3. I know there's 2 3s before you tell.
I love that it starts with the word development. After Eric's rant.
There's a time and a place.
There it is.
So in lieu of the fact that we don't have a cluster ordinance, we didn't want to preclude at least an indication that we are amenable to clusters. And frankly, I think if there's any way that as part of this upcoming budget or some other mechanism to get a little bit of additional money to create a cluster ordinance, I really think we should be doing that.
Rob, for the people on Zoom, can I read this? It's a
I
little
was
bit-
planning on.
Oh, you were gonna do it.
Please
Okay.
do it.
Why did, you made me do this. You tricked me into this. Great. Okay, all right, here I go.
Sure.
You know, am I,
Please, I was just getting ready.
number 3.1, cluster development. If a cluster project is pursued, lot sizes and setbacks can be amended through a development agreement. Densities will be established based on that allowed for single-family detached dwellings. 3B.
That's it. That's it. Everything else is already.
Oh, that wasn't too bad. Okay, you're forgiven. And you gave me candy before the meeting, so we're cool.
The second three will become number 4
Okay,
and so forth. So the idea is that we don't have a cluster ordinance with standards now, and we will hopefully be creating one of those. And in lieu of that, we wanted to put in essence a placeholder so that we'd be in a position to accommodate or at least pursue something along those lines. So again, the next point I want to make is that there's some confusion in the discussions I had initially with the folks from Westside with respect to our process, because those are not contained in this ordinance to the extent that people develop with us and then go through our processes, really understand and go through. So let me just quickly go through my addendum that I shared with all of you. Hopefully those will be answered and with respect to our processes. So the first one was they referenced a typo. I don't know if they had an earlier version or what, but anyway, it's obviously not studios. We're talking about studies. So there's at least 3 comments that talked about, and I've summarized those as far as talking about no guidance is provided regarding the specific 12 studies, and that there were no review standards for the city engineer. Secondly, that the second comment asked the question, who determines the extent of the various studies? And thirdly, the third comment references that requiring sensitive land studies for the entire development site for every report is impractical and unrealistic. Well, our section that talks about the review procedure and what have you addresses that. And if you understand our processes, I've identified how that works. So an application comes in and we have a 3-step process with the sensitive lands properties that are concept review, so that we don't have people spending lots and lots of money on projects and what have you. Initially, what we do is we do an investigation to determine what it's going to take to be able to develop a particular property. So that's the significance of the conceptual review process. So prior to being placed on the Planning Commission agenda, we do this on an ongoing basis. We have a technical review committee. You're all familiar with that. You see their reports that come through. The recommended studies are identified in that technical review meeting, and they're incorporated into the staff report. The required studies are based upon the applicant's submittal, previous neighborhood property studies. We do that all the time as well. We've got a fairly good category of studies that have been done. We rely on those. Basic staff knowledge and understanding. And also equally important is our North Ogden Hillside Protection Study that was done some years ago. So a combination of those things goes into coming forth with a recommendation to the Planning Commission that would come as part of their concept review. And then the Planning Commission would indicate as part of your approval, which are the studies that are required and to the extent that they're required. So what I hope that that answered what their concerns are relative to that. The next question was, they questioned the average slope definition that we put in there. There's probably many ways to define slope. This happens to be one of them. Warren was kind enough to provide this information that you don't necessarily do the slope. You have a lot of flexibility in how you calculate that slope and the boundaries of the slope. If there's areas that are above that 20%, those would necessarily be incorporated into the area that you'd be studying for development in that. Next, how are the boundaries created for the sensitive lands overlay? As you'll recall, we had several discussions in the Planning Commission, and in our collaboration with you, we came up with a set of boundaries. So hopefully that answers that question. The next one is consider the potential for negative impacts of the standards found in 1127.3 density, lot size, width, and characteristics. Let me just remind you all that we already have an existing zone, the HP zones, that require most of these things. What we're doing is we're actually helping people understand what it is the standards are going to be in order to accomplish development in those areas. So provisions similar to these existing constraints chapter have been incorporated into those standards for impervious coverage, buildable areas, and flag lot provisions. And we've also just made this recommendation to allow for some additional flexibility in terms of the cluster development. The next one is near and dear to Commissioner Thomas's heart, which is staff's recommendation to have some sort of a height limitation. I know that there was some discussion about it, but we just want you to give us final direction on that. There is a purpose statement in our general plan that does talk about the significance of maintaining natural views and so forth. That's up to you. There's a request to talk about the issuance of building permits is requested to reference state code. State code is state code, and we don't necessarily have to reference it. If we were going to do something with that provision with respect to building permits, we just eliminate it if that's all we were going to rely on. But this standard helps the individual provide for the required plot plan that accompanies building permit applications. And this will assist the city engineer in his review of the required grading plans. And last but not least is the concern that an economic or market analysis may be required. Staff agrees that that's probably, that we would recommend that be deleted and removed from the ordinance. We're happy to do that. So what are your considerations tonight? Remember, we've had the public hearing, so you'll be recommending to the city council, making a recommendation to them. So should the city create standards for development on sensitive lands? Second, should definitions be amended regarding open space and trails? Thirdly, is the amendment consistent with the general plan? And lastly, are there further amendments desired by the Planning Commission? So our recommendation tonight is to, what we're doing right now is to review the staff, complete the staff review, consider the general plan's environmental goals regarding sensitive lands, and make a positive recommendation to the city council. The Planning Commission can find that this amendment is consistent with the general plan and staff recommends adoption. So that's kind of a lot. I don't know if there's people that are raising their hand that want to comment about this more. We'll be happy to answer questions, but the anticipation is that if the Planning Commission is satisfied with this basic draft with the amendments that I have outlined for you, we would then forward that to the council once we've got approved minutes. Commissioners,
Any questions for
a lot of
Rob?
hard work. Hey, let me tell you, this has been a lot of hard work on everyone's part. It's not just staff. We appreciate Planning Commissioners and all of your hard work on this.
Any questions for Rob? Let's go ahead and open up do we want to discuss or open up for public comment before we discuss?
I'd prefer to hear from the public first.
Let's, yeah,
But,
with this time, let's open up to public comment. If there's any public in attendance that would like to address this item, please raise your hand in chat. We no longer have any public here on site, so.
So it looks like Richard Hall would like to make a comment.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Hall. We can't hear you if you're talking. Is he unmuted?
Yeah, I'm asking him to unmute.
Okay, I got it. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we
Now we can hear
can.
you.
All right. Richard Hall, I'm a lifelong North Ogden resident, actually a fourth generation resident. And apparently, Rob, you had quite a discussion with Carson today, which I was not aware of. Sounds like there's a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication.
Can you state your address for the record?
2781 North, 1375 East.
Thank you.
Owner manager, one of the owner managers of the Hall Brothers Land Company. We own the property right in the mouth of North Ogden Canyon. And so this is very, very concerning, obviously, to us as we continue to try to develop the land going further east towards the canyon. Wish I would have been privy to that conversation, Rob, that you had with Carson. I had a speech prepared, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not applicable now.
I would be more than happy to chat with you. We can have the same conversation. I'd be happy to do it.
I think that would be great if we could do that.
I'd be happy to. I can give you a call tomorrow if you'd like.
That would be awesome.
Thank you. Did you, in your email, did you have your phone number there? Is it?
I did not include it.
Send him another email with it in. We don't want to have you give your phone number over Zoom.
No.
Will do.
Thank you.
Sir, if you're willing, I'd still be interested in hearing at least the Reader's Digest version of your speech. I mean, this is obviously something we're considering tonight, and we're.
Well, yeah, we've been developing this ground for the last 35 years, working with North Ogden City Planning Commission, and we're now at the point where we'll be developing land east of the mountain road, and it appears to us to be highly developable. We understand that the land in the mouth of the canyon is very sensitive. And, I've enjoyed it my whole life. Everybody in my family has enjoyed it our whole lives. And we understand that needs to be very careful. But our concern obviously is putting undue regulations on highly developable land there to the east of the current Hall Tree subdivision. And it was our understanding that this ordinance was putting unduly high restraints on developing the property, and we felt it was aimed more at deterring development than assisting the developers and the landowners in developing the property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any other comments?
Thank you.
Not at this time.
All right. Just give it a second in case somebody else pops their hand out. Nothing more?
Nothing.
All right, commissioners, discussion.
I probably should have asked the last comment, what specifically you felt was hindering development, because I don't get that from this.
Well, so from my discussion, it maybe answers what you're looking at is, I think when we started the sensitive lands, it seems to me that we've started with a brush saying, here's some sensitive lands in the area, and it's morphed into everything north and east of Mountain Road, which to me is not sensitive land. I wouldn't say it as a broad brush, all of that is. And so I don't feel right that all of that just gets lumped into the same category. if I was, looking all the way across from a Pleasant View border to, well, as the way this reads, east of Mountain Road would be toward everything east of Mountain Road all the way through the city. I think there's areas as you go south of 2700, it starts to get, there may be some ground, but in my eyes, I guess because some ground might get steep, doesn't mean that it's sensitive. To steep in the sense of like what is on the south side of Mountain Road now, and then all of a sudden go to the north side and all of a sudden becomes sensitive. What changed? So from my view, from what we originally looked at is when you look at the long bench in North Ogden, the stuff as you near the power lines, really kind of a lot of stuff that's in HP3 up along the bench, along the divide, the mouth of the canyon itself, and along Coldwater Creek, preservation that may need to be sensitive through that. And those areas, there may be some sensitive issues that come up, but so not to throw a whole kink in the whole system what we got here, but the more I've read through all this and looked at it, I felt like we're almost just creating a whole nother zone that's just superseding that all of that stuff on the bench. We've got the HP zones that were generated from studies because of concerns. And so if there's things that I feel like we need to modify in the hill, let's do that in the hillside, in the current zones that we have. Let's modify those HP zones and not just create another one to slap over top of them. Because then there can be some differences, as it stands currently. I know that, and this does do that. There's so much in this that, to me, that goes beyond what I think is really needed in the sense of this zone that was, where did you get this, Rob? It was
Ogden City.
Ogden.
The initial ordinance was drafted over 40 years ago for Bountiful City. And then it's, in my opinion, tried and true.
Yeah, it addresses a lot of things, but I guess in my mind, where some of the things that I feel like we have concern, I would like to see us address it. It gives us an opportunity, we can address things almost in 3 different modes. We have 3 different HP zones, which are hillside protection zones. And if we feel like because ground is steep, that's what deems it as sensitive, then let's change everything above and east of the divide as HP zones and modify those zones to fit what we feel like it needs to fit. Just so there's just not one more step. I mean, just from the outside looking at all of this, is that there is a lot of things in here that just really define some stuff that's really not defined in our current zones that probably needs to be. And so I see that justification or understanding that, hey, this overlay maybe fixes some of that or covers it, but I would suggest that we just fix those ones that are currently there. But if because like if some of the main things that we want to hit, in my opinion, like the charts, if ground is, no matter what the zone is, if ground's over 10% and under 20, I'm a total agreement that 15,000 square foot lot should be the minimum, even if it's in the R110 zone or HP1, which allows 10,000 foot. This does that, but so adding something like that to every zone, even HP2 is at 12.5 for those minimum. So that zone would, anything steeper than 10 would require 15,000, which I'm in agreement with. I'm not in agreement, obviously, Rob brought up that height. I feel like that the height of a building is in the city is 35 feet, and that should be what it is. I don't see the need to restrict it to 25 feet. If just simply for the reason of a view shed or somebody, one person being taller than another home. Especially since now that we have the code, which almost goes all the way up the hillside, and we've got houses that tall all the way up there already. One of the areas addressed is maximum impervious material on a lot. Are we currently 50% in the city? I think that it is 50%, which I, percentage wise, whatever, we have a 30% in this, but then also we have a maximum of 7,500 square feet. A big chunk of this overlay zone is in a 2-acre zone property. And 7,500 square feet is pretty easy to get past with a home and a driveway, patio and all of that. So I would, if we just say 30%, which is nearly half, I think, what we allow elsewhere, but eliminate the square foot measurement. So if somebody wanted, I mean, in that theory, you'd have to have larger than a 1/2-acre lot to have more impervious material than 7,500 square feet, but we do have a lot of lots on the hillside that are going to be bigger than that. So I'm just going through a couple of my notes anyway, so just on the things that I circled just to mention. On driveways, for some reason, in a sensitive land area, we deem that a driveway has to be 10% grade or less, when a street that drives to the house could be 12%. So that doesn't make sense to me. Why we would, I mean, it says in here that the fire, unless approved by the fire engine or something, are able to get fire equipment up a driveway or something. So I don't know if that's simply just the flag lot. Is that, if I'm remembering right, that's where we talked to flag lots, wasn't it? Because the fire truck would have to go those driveways, but just looking at things to find consistency. If we allow a 12% street, then we just as well have a 12% driveway is okay, rather than a lesser restriction. But in the gist of it, I mean, I don't see why we need to restrict construction of development projects limited to October through April only, or I said that on April through October, I guess it would be, that can happen. As long as, there's other things that, with the SWIP, as this addresses a lot of things that probably have progressed through the years. We have SWIP, we have LID, we have all of these things that address these things in the development and building practices. And so in here, we're trying to readdress those, I feel like, which I think is unneeded, but here we're getting specific in the ordinance that may differ from specificity of a SWIP plan, a stormwater prevention plan, or a low impact development standard. I know in this, we refer to that as being required. So one thing to bring up note, I don't know if it's a poke fun at ourselves as a city or not, but all areas of development sites need to be clear of natural vegetation in the course of construction, shall be replanted with vegetation which has good erosion control and characteristics. And later on calls for mulching and things to allow plants to grow. And I just chuckled because that's been my desire, that we do that with the basin along the divide. I know it was seeded, but and it didn't take because it's just rocks. But that's the example we need to set as a city, is go mulch up the trees over there at the green waste plant, and scatter them out up there on that scar on the hill. But I mean, there's a lot of material in this. It's probably what I would look at, rather than just pass a general overlaying ordinance on all of it, would be what specific things do we feel like we need to address that aren't in those HP zones. And I know the property, once you go south of the divide, is no longer in HP zones, and maybe that's what we look at, is putting those into those zones so that we can gain some of the controls that are required by that zone. And I guess really from the standpoint of maybe even looking side by side with those HP zones, which I don't know if you would call them the most restrictive zones in the city, but they do require studies and things that some of the other zones don't. And maybe a comparison to what that requires versus what this overlay zone requires. because I'm not of the opinion that just because we cross Mountain Road, that it turns into sensitive land. And so then therefore should be governed differently than what it currently is with at least to the north end of town is the HP zones. So,
I'd like to address that point, if I might.
okay,
The reason why we talked about doing that is to recognize that most of what is below that area is already developed. Why put an overlay on that really is of no effect? So that's the reason why. That's the importance of the overlay with respect to the potential for development that's going on out there.
well, but I guess, yeah, so from the standpoint of reading through all of it, I look at it as saying is, are we getting more restrictive development standards and painting that across a lot of the undeveloped part of the city with a broad brush to say, rather than readdress the zoning requirements, we're going to just put another zone over top of it that has all these other things on it. And I honestly, I don't feel like that this overlay is overly more restrictive than like any of the HP zones. That, you know, I agree with some of the comments that were in a letter to us that, you know, what I don't want to have, and it's nothing against our city engineer, but I don't necessarily agree with leaving it up to the city engineer to decide. Like there's a lot of things that refer to if the city engineer decides this or if that, because our great engineer we have with us now isn't going to be with us forever, you know, and who knows what we're going to get in 5 years when Lauren isn't with us, but you know, and what their opinion is. And so where are the standards for our city engineer to gauge off of? Just like our governing body is the planning commission, we have ordinances that we're gauged off of. We can't just say, if the planning commission decides it's necessary, we're going to plug it in. I mean, we're not nearly as educated as an engineer, so fortunately for everybody else, we don't get that ability. But if we have things referencing that, then I think we also need to have standards that govern what way a city engineer could decide things. I mean, we can't get down to the details. I understand that. And that's why we have one, is we want those abilities to say, yes, the city engineer is that step before somebody comes to a body and says, hey, I want a variance from this because it doesn't fit this property. And we're
That's kind
giving,
of a conundrum. You want people who are uneducated to make those decisions? The answer is no.
yeah,
And that's why we have a series of public works standards and so forth. You want to try to get to that level of detail. I'm writing a lot of stuff.
yeah. Well, and I mean, it's just whatever standards are governed. If a city engineer is got his, you know, sandbox that he has to be within, but if there's things that are just simply the opinion of one person, even though that person does have more education in what development should happen typically, you know, doesn't necessarily need to leave it the decision up to that person. But those are some of my thoughts. I know that's kind of a little bit of a rant. And
So can I get some clarification on your thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, you addressed all these individual things, but I didn't get the impression you were looking to change those things rather than maybe address those things in the zoning. I didn't feel like you think this should be a standard that should be adopted. The overlay.
no, I would think if the certain thing, I guess I would like to see certain things in the overlay highlighted that we feel like we would need and implement those in the HP zones rather than just have a broad brush going over that.
I think I disagree with you. I think I do like the overlay for that. And I like the idea of the individual items that you said, I can't disagree with. I agree with you on height. I agree with you, other than maybe the 20% driveway or the 10% driveway. I think I can still see a point for that, but I'd rather see that. I think the overlay go in. because we've worked on it and because it's in front of us and it's actionable now. I'm not gonna die on that hill, but I think that's where I'm kind of leaning, that I think there is value to it. And I think we do have sensitive lands. I think they are by and large mostly addressed with the area we've discussed. And I think either method works. Okay, in my opinion, I think an overlay works, and I think addressing them in the zoning works. But I feel like this is something we have in front of us now, and I'd like.
Well, I guess to me, the overlay, what some of the things this gets into is why I've been in favor of doing an overlay zone because I think it addresses a lot of things, and I don't think it was really overly restrictive than the other zones.
Mm-hmm.
But really kind of what made me maybe start thinking a little different about it tonight was it seems that the overlay kind of gets a lot more into detail into the buildings themselves, things that are more relative to, I mean, with this overlay saying, well, now everything we get into how a building looks, how big the building can be, and all these things that tend to be, I guess, just a little bit more into detail into the building side of things. And I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
So,
I mean, for example, and I don't mean when I say get into this and it's not things we need, but I think it's things that we already address with the city is, how a site plan should be submitted for a building permit, how, hey, this is how it needs to be drafted, and these things I feel like it's repetitive than our processes that we already have. And maybe that's, so I have a little bit of the same confusion that some of the people that have written letters or had conversations with staff about is because it goes to those lengths, it starts to say, well, is this now superseding what we have in the building department and those processes? Because we're addressing it here, and, in here it says my driveway can't be more than 10% steep, in slope, but the building code doesn't care, or, why, because we have a sensitive land, now my driveway has to be not as steep. I mean, I hate steep driveways, so I'm not saying.
I have one.
But they're just things like that.
Well, so there was and I'm really grateful for the way we received these and when we received these the public rebuttal to the ordinance, because I had some time to chew on it and think about it. And one of the points that was brought up was that, hey, these are very developable lands. They're not really sensitive by nature. And I think you're kind of arguing the same thing. Just because they're here doesn't mean they're sensitive. And I've been thinking about that for a week and a half, and I think they are sensitive. And I think the proof's in the pudding that they're the last of the city to be developed. If they were easy to be developed or not so, and I don't know if sensitive is really the right word, but if not so maybe unique, I think they would have been chewed up prior to this. I think, we're getting into territory at that hill that is just a little bit different. And I think it has different fire requirements, right? There's the impact of development up there has I mean, can have a huge impact. Imagine if, we couldn't get fire trucks. And I'm not saying that, anyway, imagine we couldn't get fire trucks up there because of some way we've allowed development to happen and the mountain catches on fire, right? Because of whatever, that could happen downtown, right? Same people are going to behave the same way that live up there. And, what happens? Well, the fire goes straight up. And I do think we need to be more careful in those areas. I really do with our development. And I think the applicant or the people that wrote the letters even agreed with that point. I don't know. I don't know, those are my thoughts. Again, they're not real well defined, but I've supported this in principle, and I think I continue to support it. Admitting that, Eric, that your methods of getting there are also valid, right? Let's fix it in the zones. Okay, I could go along with that too. I could also easily go along with the overlay, and I'd like to tweak some things too. I think the building height, for example, is a valid point. I think there are a couple of little tweaks that we could make to it, and I think staff has offered to make a few of them that I thought were reasonable. And I think it gets us to a good place, really. Anyway, I don't know what to say other than I think I'm more inclined to move forward with this than not.
Well, and that's what I say is, I'm not saying throw this in the garbage and do whatever. If there's a way to incorporate it in our existing zone, I think that works. If there's highlighted things, or to the same point is those things that we do need to feel adjusted, or in my opinion, if we have something in here that's repetitive or an existing requirement we have in the city, then let's pull it out rather than, cause confusion or something to that effect. Do we need to address, for example, and the maximum grade of a street or right of way should be 12%. That's our city standard now. So why do we put it in again? Like, it's things that we have
Sure,
like that,
certainly.
to me, causes confusion.
Yeah.
If you're saying, well, wait, does that mean that's different than somewhere else in the city? And so that, I think maybe that's just, if this goes on to the city, if it's ready to go on to the council and go through those things, that's what I would want to see happen, is all of those things that we already addressed somewhere in the code, that they be removed, because this isn't intended to grant anything, how would I say, less restrictive than a current zone, right? I guess it does, because we allow flag lots and we don't allow them in other zones, so you
It's a
could
little
consider that
both.
be as less restrictive, but
I'd say it's a little of both.
from our, so it's to build on and identify, I guess, more some of those things, but I've talked a lot tonight, so
Yeah, you're taking my role here.
what,
I'd be really interested in hearing from other planning commissioners if they feel like, Eric, are you leaning towards, if you had to make a motion, like, like, how would that read? Like,
if I made a motion, I would say want to see this compared to our HP zones and the requirements, kind of a side-by-side comparison, and how much we're really seeing or defining differences. Because I think that's the one step that I know I haven't done a good enough job in looking at this yet, is really, this all makes there's a lot of things in here that make sense and are practical. But again, as we compare it to our existing zones, how is it really side by side? And because there really may not be that much more on it. And granted, this is an easier way than changing all the zones. I guess would be 3 zones that would be affected, and then changing all the property elsewhere east of Mountain Road to zones that get into those same requirements as well.
As I listen to the comments going on, I always get the feeling maybe we ought to, instead of making a recommendation, have a chance to be able to compare the different zones against it and modify it as such. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, not necessarily. I think that, I feel like, in my personal opinion, that might be something that could be maybe just highlighted a little bit more as it goes to council. For one, I think we know more about the zones than the council does, because we deal with them more regularly.
True.
But I think that would be a benefit as it goes to the next level. I don't know that if the intent is for this to move on tonight with the commissioners, then would be my recommendation that happens, but.
I've always believed that inaction is sometimes better than the wrong action, right? So I don't want to go forward if you feel it's sloppy or if you feel it's undone, right? Like, this will eventually turn into law, right? And I think it does, if it needs better review, I think we review it some more.
If I was to go down and if I was to give this a positive recommendation with changes, I already mentioned I agree with the 15,000 square foot minimum, anything over 10%. I would eliminate the 7,500 square feet maximum of impervious material and just leave it at 30%, which is less than our current zones allow. To give an idea of, I guess, really is a half acre lot would probably be around 7,500 square feet. For those in attendance, and to give an idea as a reference to that, most all of the lots in the cove are half acre lots. So that would, from, I guess, the current zone they're under, if they are that 50% that we have as the city code, it would be a little bit less for those, but 7,500 is quite a lot. But I would just eliminate that just simply because if there are larger lots, multiple lots as one in the cove, people may have more items, larger homes, larger driveways, all those things. I agree with the 20%, if you're calculating usable area and including that, I would say to add to the cluster side of the development is anything that's over 20% does not count as acreage towards clustering or.
That's in our ordinance
I
already.
think you addressed that in
Yeah,
here,
it's already in there.
but now that we're adding the clustering, just to make sure that that's identified, but
What about the other changes as laid out by staff? So that were discussed earlier, the removal of, and did you agree with those? So,
yeah, the one thing I would say is I felt like it was a little bit ambiguous on determining what studies would need to be, but is that what you were trying to address, Rob? Is
Yeah.
based on the studies that the HP is requiring, then you say, well, you gotta do those, but this, you know, I think in one of the letters I agreed with, I believe was it the letter from West Side that was stating that the person that wrote their letter was saying that if it's a known area by a federal or state agency, a known item, then that would trigger a study rather than just because it's in this zone, it has to have these 12 studies done. What was that?
We don't, that's what they said. I didn't see the point of that, frankly. I mean, we already have our own existing study. That's what we rely on.
The HP study. Yeah, but
You know, our hillside protection study, it identifies those things. That's what we rely on.
yeah, so if that's the determining factor, but that only covers those 3 zones that say, hey, there's a fault area in your development here, we want a fault study, or those things, which I think are fair to ask anybody, but in the areas, I guess you'd look at, say, there is a lot of area that this zone would cover that aren't in the hillside zones that don't have those studies already done, right?
Right. I mean,
So,
it's an ongoing thing. The Utah Geological and Mineral Survey is basically tasked with doing those kinds of studies statewide, and they get to them as they're able to. And
so what's the governing, what would be that governing rule of what would trigger, hey, you need this study?
when an application comes in, we take a look at, as I indicated, we look at our existing study to determine here are the geologic or hydrologic or other hazards. Here's the ones that you need to address.
Be based on our study. So
Right.
that's the, but what
I think
happened?
we know
So-
I think we know our city a whole lot better than.
Well, but what I'm saying is we haven't had a study done east of Mountain Road at the bottom of the North Island Canyon, have we? So we don't have anything to gauge that there.
And if we don't, then they would be required to produce those studies. That's the determining factor. Now, 20 or 30 years ago, we did the 208 water quality study, and there was, and the county does have some maps that indicated that they did the entire county. And we have some geologic hazard maps from them. I don't know if they've ever been incorporated around here. That's another resource.
Yeah, so I mean, as long as we have that, I think that was been part of the confusion is, you know, if for example, the HP zone, that hillside protection study is the benchmark of what requires studies. You know, that really doesn't change what we already have.
The HP zones, there's a couple different ordinances that apply. There's the existing sensitive lands chapter, and then there's the HP ordinances. And so what we've done is we have transferred those requirements into this ordinance, so they're not duplicative. And what they do is they end up giving specific direction for both staff and any property owner that wants to develop, so that you're not second guessing, as you indicated earlier. We've got a standard that says, here's what you need to address. It puts it as a level playing field for everybody that's trying to do the very best thing we can, which is what? Provide safety for the future residents that are going to be living up there.
You know, I'm just going to chime in a little bit here, but just listening to everybody's thoughts on it, all completely valid. I would have to say I am more aligned with Commissioner Mason, where I think this overlay is actually a great idea, rather than splitting it all up within the different zones. And just like Mr. Scott just said, you know, just incorporated them all for a level playing field. But I think what we have to look at in terms of the sensitive land is we're kind of at a critical point right now with the city. When what makes our city, you know, what it is it's the trail access, it's the views, it's the, you know, and as we start building up that mountainside, which we know is coming, it would be nice to treat it with care, you know, with extra care to understand those slopes and the hazards and I mean, even protecting the views and the trail accesses. And this sensitive lands overlay of I guess the hillside protection zones, it does make a lot of sense to me to keep it together. Now, you know, there are a lot of good points about, well, maybe there are certain things in there that, you know, can be reevaluated. But I think the overlay, I really like the idea of that.
So I've got a quick story to tell, and I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me. So I was up in Portland working one time, and I was working with this woman who was from Portland, and we were talking a lot about where I'm from, and I told her I was from Utah, and she was like, "Oh, I've been to Utah once. I went to Salt Lake," and I said that, well, you know, what you think? And she goes, "So weird. It was so weird. Like and she meant this about Salt Lake, and it's not about hillside development per se, but she goes, Salt Lake was so weird to me. Like I was looking up at these beautiful mountains, but I'd have to look like through a Taco Bell sign." And the reason I bring that up is because, I mean, our mountains and our views, they're really spectacular, right? And I think they are in themselves sensitive. And so I'm using that to that story to kind of bring home the point that I do like wanted, and I think even the rebuttals to this spoke to the fact that they want that land treated well as well. Maybe we just have differing ideas on what those definitions are, but anyway, I don't necessarily know if I'm prepared to make a motion on anything tonight myself, but somebody else is. I'm all ears. So awkward.
It's okay to sit for a second.
Well, I would say that I agree with Commissioner Nancaro and with a lot of what Eric said tonight. Mainly in that I agree that calling them sensitive, whatever word we choose to use, I agree that that area is a section where it can be seen almost from anywhere in the city. And so the way that it's developed should be treated in a sensitive manner. And I agree with Eric in that there are a lot of things in there that I agree we change the height of the buildings, anything that's redundant may not need to be there, but I think I'm also in favor of the overlay.
So we have most everybody in favor of the overlay. If we go through here, what as is, any corrections? So it sounds like, let's address a couple of items. We've talked building height. I've heard 3 opinions that adjust the building height to the same as what it is in the city, is leave it as the 35 feet. Essentially remove that restriction, because the current code in the city would govern it otherwise. Is there any opposition to that opinion?
I'm in favor of removing the building height.
Okay,
Adding the cluster provision.
adding the cluster provision, any opposed opinion of adding that? Okay,
Delete the section on the economic studies and so forth.
yes. Where is the section with all the study lists, the list of studies? Where is that? I mean, whatever the studies are, I think, maybe make a note in there that refers to the
I
hillside
have it in there.
section
I have.
as the underlying governing body.
Right.
Okay. I would like to see the 7,500 square feet of impervious material removed and just leave it as the 30%.
Now, I would like to discuss that a little bit, if I might. And not being argumentative, but we heard you. And so what we did is we provided some flexibility. We said that in that provision that's on page 7 of the ordinance, it says that the maximum impervious surface, and by the way, it used to be 10,000 square feet in the old zone, was 7,500 square feet or 30%, whichever is smaller. And so that takes into account the difference in the 2-acre lots versus the HP1, the 10,000 and so forth. So that was the idea behind that. But we also included in there a provision that said that when the grading and drainage plans that are established for subdivisions, that if there is something in that grading and drainage plan that is addressed, that the city engineer could waive that requirement. So it says, upon approval by the city engineer, if the request is consistent with the approved grading and drainage plan and any low impact design for the subdivision or site plan. So we tried to listen to what your concerns were. We tried
So
to provide
is
some-
that saying that if you have a subdivision with a grading and drainage plan that's approved and it's showing, because we don't show impervious material on those plans. So how are we showing? I mean, if their lot is consistent with the graded and drainage plan, then what is the trigger that could say? Because to me here, we have another one of those gotchas that the city engineer has the ability to say, yeah, you can do it. You made me mad last week, you can't.
I shall not be mad.
I mean,
I-
we keep referring to saying, well, if the city engineer says so, then you can, but
Well, if
What-
the
what's the
expert says
gauge?
it's okay, his job is to make sure that we're not trying to create additional water coming off that map. Right? And that's what low impact design is all about. We're trying to be sensitive. We're trying to get water back in the ground and so forth. And the more impervious surface that we create, especially on steep slopes, that just exacerbates the problem. All the way down and out to the lake. So I don't know what the right standard is.
Well,
Come on, Lauren. What's your thoughts on this? He's the expert on this, not me.
Lots of thoughts, lots of responsibility.
I guess I look at it and say, where does the number come from? I mean, same thing could be said as where does a percentage come from, but really,
Yeah. And the goal is, like Rob said, is trying to reduce the amount of impervious surface. So we're not having tons of water, runoff water come down throughout the city and into our storm drain.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at it like some ground that I developed, you know, additional yard that I built. As I graded it, now this was just all grass, but I graded it, and to the downhill side, I burned it up to where,
Yeah.
you know, water will stand in that a foot top deep before it runs off to a neighbor's property.
And those are
You know,
some of the considerations when you're looking at the LID and they're grading the drainage plans, and are they making special provisions to keep some of it on site? They'll be granted some special consideration.
So maybe in a note in there is to exceed that, you need to show that your additional impervious water on it is going to stay on your site. So somebody on 2-acre lot wants to put 25,000 feet of impervious surface, they're building their own retention pond also. Maybe something that just addresses that. That then gives us a standard of how somebody could go over that, rather than just an opinion of the
So
engineer.
a statement,
To exceed the 30% or 7,500. You know, anything that would exceed that would have to show that that excess drainage would be retained on site. I think that's a good measure. So somebody could do that and say, well, they put a real retention pond on their property, or design their landscaping that holds that water rather than sends it out to the city infrastructure.
Correct.
yep,
Okay,
I think that's a good one.
we can work through these things.
You didn't finish while I was gone?
Oh,
Just about.
sorry.
I could let the record show a guffaw on my part. Let's see.
So I'll make sure I haven't missed one for you all.
Also, is it like, am I gonna look like the Unabomber if I put my hoodie on? Because like, are you get cold?
Cold? Well, I got 2 jackets on. I'm
Okay.
outside today, it's cold. out there.
Are we on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there,
I think that's all. I'm sure.
is there any interest in changing the driveways on the flag lots to 12%, the same as what our street standard is? It's to accommodate the fire marshal. The fire equipment.
I'm all about, you know,
Just
the
to-
sensitive areas letting. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I mean, this is the purpose of the ordinance for me, it's fire, right? And I've cited this example a lot in here, but
No, what I'm saying is, I guess where does the 10%?
We specifically went and talked to the fire marshal. about
Okay.
that. That standard came from him.
like,
So,
I know where you're coming from too, Eric, on that, like, why the difference, right? But man, oh man, like, I mean, even if it's hard to just get started up, I don't know, like, I just want.
Well, no, I have nothing wrong with the slope. I just am saying, if our street can be 12% and there's no issue with the fire services, then why is the driveway up need to be less?
Was it the transition from the street to the driveway? Is that, I was thinking maybe that, because the fire truck is long, to the bottom out when it's, you know what I mean? Remember your van?
Lauren?
12% grades are only allowed for short segments of the roadway. We can't do a 12% for half a mile.
Yeah, but
Well,
these
these
are
driveways are only allowed to be
Yeah.
200 feet long.
Right, but 10% is our standard, and we allow 12% over short segments.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, that will bog down the fire trucks and they'll come to a halt. But if they can get up over a little hill and then have a lesser grade, then they can make it up that 12%.
Okay.
I mean, if this is moving forward like I think it is, you know, I think, I don't want to build anything so restrictive, you know, for the landowners and all that, but it's not gonna get kicked out perfect, right? And I said earlier that inaction is better than bad action, but I still think if there's little tweaks that are so preventative that it's stopping something, we'll change the ordinance at that point.
Well, yeah, my only reason is just for consistency. You know, if whatever maximums we allow, so honestly, it doesn't matter. It's a driveway for a flag lot. It's just something that I pointed out. It's one of those rare instances. I don't think I had anything else that was highlighted. Oh, the dates. Construction can only happen from
Yeah,
April
that's,
15th to October.
I don't think it says that, does it? I read
Says
that in the
construction and
report.
development site shall be of a nature that will minimize it says minimize the disturbance of vegetation cover, especially between October 1st and April 15th of the following year.
So as part of the landscape plan, that's the type of thing that we would incorporate into that.
But I'm just thinking as a developer, if I'm gonna go up and build a subdivision and nobody here at the city is this way, but let's again, fast forward when all the people in the city are different. And you got somebody up there red tagging a job site because the bulldozer's going in, that's October 2nd.
Well, I'm hoping that what will happen is that as part of the pre-construction meeting, that those things are gonna be clearly identified and they'll be consistent with the approval that's granted by the planning commission relative to that. So the whole idea is that there are certain times of the year when you start denuding ground and what have you, need to take special care. You mentioned SWIP and other kinds of things.
Yeah.
So as long as those things are coordinated together, it's simply saying that those are the times of year that we need to be careful about.
So maybe in that one, we would just reference, if we're referencing dates, because to me, that would be something in an ordinance that was created prior to the stormwater prevention laws. And that was their way of having stormwater prevention as an erosion. And so maybe you just have in, or as dictated in the development's SWIP plan. And let
Do
that
you
SWIP.
remember where that provision is?
Page 10, item number 4.
Those October to April have been around for decades.
Yeah,
It was trees with a lot.
because there's another one that states that something about revegetating. After completion of offsite improvements, vegetation will be planted in all disturbed areas only during the following time periods: March 15th through May 15th, and September 15th through October 31st. So if you got a good dry February where there's no snow on the ground, you still can't hydroseed. But it'll be there for spring. And then again in section 8, all disturbed soil surfaces shall be established or covered prior to November 1st. If the planned impervious surfaces cannot be established prior to November 1st. A temporary treatment adequate to prevent erosion shall be installed on those surfaces. And that's the definition of what your SWIP plan would do. That's item number 8, page 11. So some of those practices that were already governed development are already in place everywhere, not just in these areas. So some of those just stood out to me as things that this ordinance was older than the SWIP laws. 40 years old is not older than dirt law. I'm older than 40.
I knew you'd confess someday.
But I'm younger than you.
Went a long ways. I'll be happy to,
So maybe those couple areas, maybe just refer to.
I'll work with,
SWIP.
Lauren on that, because, maybe we just simply say that it's, the planning dates are established as part of the landscape plan. Yeah. Analyze. Short and sweet.
Is there an issue with? Now we're out of the flag lot section. We got another section that says driveways can only be 10%.
Like I said, we
I don't know what that
talked to the fire marshal, that was his preference.
I mean, 10% is still pretty steep for, especially a driveway. But I guess in my mind, again, what does how steep your driveway have requirement have to do with sensitive land? Like if driveways shouldn't be more than 10%, then we should have that as a.
Well, I was with you. I was with them on the flag lot one, because I think that a fire truck needs to get up into some of those areas, right? But on
They're not putting an ambulance in your driveway.
right, but no,
But
but
you do
but
want to
on-
get the firemen to be able to get up there and fight the fire. If you're
Right.
in a steep
yeah,
drive.
but on
like
a
that,
resident,
you're
on
not
a standard
even gonna get
residential
there.
driveway, you know, if they can't get that extra 20 feet. I mean, they're gonna park in front of the house, with the fire truck.
And then they're gonna have to hoof it up there.
Yeah.
And if it's an icy day, good luck.
But what I guess that
Anyway,
probably,
we have the fire marshal on the city council. He'll be able
Yeah.
to weigh in on
if
that.
that's an issue, then let's address it for all of the stuff. That doesn't, that's not something special for sensitive land.
Well, remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about public safety. And we're talking about providing the realm and the breadth of services that are incorporated for this entire area. And it's more than just the physical aspects of the land and what have you. We're talking about sustainability and livability up there as well. It's a balance of all this stuff.
We've addressed the building heights.
Yep.
Um,
Got those listed down.
I think that those were my highlights anyway.
Very thorough. And wise. I mean, I come and tell the whole planning commission, like, if you're ever torn between siding between me and Eric, don't go with me. Like, he's way smarter in this than I am, so. Mr. Thomas, you looking for a motion this evening, or was this something you wanted to table?
In my opinion, if those things are all addressed, if we grab all those, we can make a motion. If you feel like we want to compare it anymore, have those things done, then it can be brought
Well,
back.
there's one thing that's lingering to me, and that is that on the outside of this item, that Mr. Scott promised a phone call to an interested party, and it would seem a little, I don't know, it would just seem a little like we're not taking those words seriously if we make an action prior to that conversation, you know? And so for that, I'm almost entertaining just tabling this for yet another meeting. I don't want to keep kicking the can down the road, but you know, that's, I don't know, thoughts on that?
I mean, I will report on my conversation with the city council. How does that?
That'd be
Yeah, I
fair.
mean, this isn't the end of the line for this. There would still be an opportunity for, you know, public comment or additional input from that interested party at the city council level.
I'd entertain a motion. If we're done discussing, or we can continue to discuss after the motion.
Well, I would motion that we adopt the changes as noted tonight, because I think they were exhaustive. I think they hit almost all the topics in the objections that I saw. Therefore, I would motion that we recommend positive adaptation of this sensitive lands chapter to the city council with all the changes that were discussed tonight.
I'll second.
You have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? I'll get my roll out because I can't see your faces. You know, after how many years I should know. Commissioner Nancaro,
Yes.
I do know, but you know, when you go
Yeah, oh yeah.
look at somebody like, what's this guy? Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Arner,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Good discussion, commissioners. Sorry I ranted for so long. I won't call it ranting.
Valid points.
No, I appreciate the discussion. I learned a lot from listening to it. It's really, really good.
I just wanted to go till the jazz were over.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Remarks from planning commissioners besides that snide one?
I'd be interested in knowing everyone's take on, when I walked in this room and saw that some of us would be on Zoom, and some of us would be physical, I felt like it would give an unfair playing field to the people who are physically here. Right? You can cut people off, you can get body language, we can't see theirs. Do we feel like this is an okay forum to continue the hybrid? Meaning, I was of the opinion at the onset of the meeting that we should either be all Zoom or maybe all here, but do we want to continue with the hybrid?
I think it's okay, but I would like that we get a stand that has a TV that just has the commissioners on it that are on Zoom.
So is John still on with us?
It's hard to do with that because we
I
also
think
want to show.
He's the
them.
one that had conversations with the city council, so he'd be the best one to ask about that.
He's item 11. You can't talk yet. I'm just kidding.
I also think the front row Joes here are I mean, those are the worst seats in the house. That's like the front row of a movie theater to me. Like,
Are you gonna spit on something?
I just feel so superior to them.
Really, my only issue with that is, will they be picked up because they don't have a mic?
They
That's what we
turned the
do.
mics,
Those mics, we can.
Oh, I see.
The ones in.
Okay, so we've tested that? No.
council did that.
Council did it last week.
Okay, all right. I'm
So that's-
John, are you on with us?
Yes, I'm here.
What was your question about that, Rob?
Well, John, maybe you could they were just discussing the merits of having a hybrid meeting, whether all the commissioners should be expected to be here versus having a combination Zoom. Well, I'm speaking for you. I'll be quiet.
okay. No. I'm all about respecting people's desires to not, right? Like, and if you want me to wear a mask, if you want me to wear a hazmat suit, whatever. But I'm just thinking maybe an all or nothing. Like maybe we all continue on Zoom, or I don't know. The hybrid was just. It feels like we have an unfair advantage to voice that maybe the Zoom people don't have. I just don't want to.
You know, from our standpoint, at least from my standpoint, it's really not that different than our normal Zoom meeting in terms of what I can see and interact with. I think the issue is maybe you guys can't see us, you know, and I don't know if it would work if like you had the Zoom up on your iPad in front of you or something where you could still see us. But from my standpoint, I didn't feel at a disadvantage because I could basically see and hear everything you were doing, and I could see Commissioner Barker and Commissioner Arner, and just like I normally would on a Zoom call.
Here's what I'd love to see. So I can see what we have going here on the screen. If we could have that on a second screen, I mean.
I mean, we could have the Zoom on our iPad if we're muted.
Yeah, that's the key. You can't have audio.
Yeah.
I've tried that in meetings, you know, when everybody has the Teams meeting up on a laptop. It's just lots of echoing and voices.
Yeah.
The sound comes in a little bit
Right.
microseconds off, and it's awful.
Well,
okay.
we can try that. We can
Okay.
put ourselves on Zoom.
I actually really enjoyed being here.
Yeah, and then if it worked for the Zoom people, that was my concern. So
Well, I don't know, Brandon, if you
Oh, go
put on a big parka sweatshirt thing, is it like freezing down there?
well, yeah, like I can't feel my fingers or toes, but like.
I wouldn't last. I would be like dead on the floor by now, so.
Maybe in May, like the sun will heat the building more.
You have a thermostat. I'm not cold, Lisa, so I don't know what.
He's also undead.
All right.
So let me ask a quick question. As you guys look out, if there were people from the public out there, how secure would you feel since there's no mask mandate or anything? So say I don't know how many people they would let in there, 20?
So the room is very spaced out. You know the hallway though. Your chances of bumping into somebody in the hallway for 10, 15 seconds are probably good. But once you enter the chamber here, everything's spaced out. I would suggest to someone that may be concerned about that they could show up early to the meeting And then, take their seat, and we're about 6 feet apart here. And I don't think you'd have much. I mean, it's an indoor room, so I don't know, but I've also been
Okay.
back. So I
Yeah, I got it. Thanks. I just noticed no one's wearing masks and there's no mask mandate if we wanted people, if there were more people in the room. So
We're just.
not to be paranoid, but I think I'm just gonna stick with Zoom for a while, see how it goes.
And if you ever requested it, Commissioner Ankaro or anyone, I don't have a problem putting on a mask for any reason, so let me know.
Oh, thanks. I'm more worried about, if public came in and there were more people there,
Yeah. so-
Today's probably fine.
Yeah.
When you wear a mask trying to talk, it gets muffled. Can make it a lot more difficult to be understood.
Just kidding.
I've been asked to be muzzled.
But yeah, this will muzzle you, is that what you're saying?
There's a couple of us talking.
Okay, well, if this works, then that was my remark, was that I just wanted to know if this works. And if the hybrid method works, then
This worked fine for me. I had no problem.
Okay, any other remarks, commissioners? How about Rob?
Wanted to share with you, our land use code is really coming close to being ready to disseminate. And we were hoping that we'd get a couple sections to you tonight, but we just ran into a couple of tweaks that we want to make. So hopefully we're going to get those to you here in the next week, but please don't hold me to that. But I'm very hopeful that we're going to get that done. Again, we're going to do it incrementally. I mean, that's a big ordinance, obviously. So section 1 is going to be one that you'll be very familiar with because it talks about process, it talks about the planning commission, your roles and responsibilities and so forth. So we're hoping to get that on its way. And I will just, my days are numbered, as you all know, but
yeah, I heard that before.
I know it's a lot. It's going to depend on the new planning director. Scott Hess will be here on May 10th. And so he and I will get together and he can let me know what he would like me to help him out with relative to this. I committed to 2 things. I committed to seeing through the sensitive overlay ordinance, and I committed to seeing through the land use code. So those are.
So we keep tabling, and then you just.
What if it wouldn't have passed? Would you ever retire?
Yeah.
Do the best I can.
Yeah. Okay. John, do you have anything with us tonight, for us tonight?
Yes, just so you are aware that the council will be discussing the form of our minutes. I'm not sure if you're aware, but most cities' minutes are not as detailed as ours are. And we're looking at making a commitment to put everything on YouTube and then have our minutes reflect when discussion starts to the YouTube timer, so that it's easy for residents who are interested in what happened in the word for word to be able to watch the video. But that's going to be coming to the council and to in theory to all these groups, assuming that it works and that it's we're just trying to make it a little bit easier for the staff who are preparing the summary as opposed to the word for word, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want stage makeup if I'm going to be some movie star now. It's only fair.
Yeah, do you have a particular rouge you like, or
one of those things that the women wear that make their bellies smaller? Like, I want one of those.
Want a corset?
Yes, I want a corset. I want stage makeup.
And then just one comment with what you were just talking about. We do find that with council, those who wear masks and try to talk, it doesn't pick up on Zoom very well. And so in council, at least, they were, anyone who was speaking was taking their mask off so they could be heard, because so for those who are sensitive to that, then, that's why we're still trying to make it a hybrid option for everybody that wants to.
Mason, I'll tell you a story after the meeting.
Okay,
involves you and of course.
is that it, John?
Yeah, that's all I've got.
All right, thank you. Motion for adjournment?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Second, all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Any opposing votes? Thank you.
Bye, everybody.